I think the world is warming. I think it's a natural phenomenon. But I also think we have a role to play. There are 7 billion of us on a planet. We live in symbiosis with the entire ecological system. It's the height of arrogance for any of us to say that we don't impact the environment around us. I think we do. I think logically, scientifically, we have a role to play. I think it's not nearly as much a role to play as progressives would tell us, but I think there's a role that we play. I have a lot of friends who say, you know what, climate change isn't real. It's not really happening. No, climate change has always been real. The world has gotten cooler. The world has been hotter than it is now. Climate change is real. Natural phenomenon. To say there's no such thing as climate change, then you can't really understand why there was a little ice age. You can't understand why millions of years ago it was way hotter than now. The world gets hotter, the world gets cooler. Every planet that we know of in the solar system has seen climate change to some degree. It's a natural phenomenon for various reasons. But also, there are 7 billion of us. We live in ecological balance with everything else on the planet by God's own design, according to Genesis 1. Therefore, we can certainly affect the planet, and I think we do. I just don't think it's as much as some on the left would have us believe, because a lot of people on the left, their agenda is really not about solving climate change. I mean, let's be honest here. If their agenda was really about solving climate change, they would be going to war against China and India right now, because as our emissions have continued to go down, their emissions continue to go up. We could all hold our breath and die, and China and India would still be causing climate change. But you don't hear about that from the left. Nope. Most of the people on the left who care about climate change really care about deindustrializing the West and regressing our society. Given the options, I don't care about climate change. I have friends who it is their issue. They are passionate about climate change, but they don't drive Teslas. Got a couple of them who hate Elon Musk now because he said he would vote for Ron DeSantis, and they thought he was a good progressive, and he's not. So a lot of it is political. But here's my thinking on climate change. We're not going to solve it. We're not going to solve it. What we're going to do is degrade our way of life. And I don't believe we've reached peak humanity and must now descend into something else. I just don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that we should in some way have to degrade our way of life and our existence so that some progressive somewhere can scratch their itch that they're doing something to make the world better when they're not doing anything to make the world better. They're doing a great deal to make the world a whole lot worse, because they're never going to deal with the China and India situation. I bring all of this up, of course, because the White House has decided they're going to declare a climate emergency. There's a heat wave. Now, I don't know if y'all know this. You may need to sit down for this one, because this may be some news some of you can't handle. I mean, when I found out, I was like, holy beep. Can't say that word. I had no idea. It's summer. Do you know what happens in the summer? It gets hot. How hot? Even the Democrats who are well past being done with Biden are getting thigh sweats. That's how hot. It gets hot. And guess what? In a few months, the climate, brace for it, wait for it, it's going to change again. It's going to get cold. And we'll get to something called winter. I think the data shows the winters are not getting as cold. The summers are getting a little more hot. But I grew up with a lot of really good teachers who told us that mankind is the most adaptable species to ever live on planet Earth. The Dutch are below sea level. The Dutch have engineered a bunch of canals and well, I can't say night now because people might get offended, so I got to say dams. And maybe they'll get offended saying there's no wind anymore. They've got seawalls and the like. They keep their country protected. They may have to build a little higher now. So the pivot has been, when we say adapt, is, but it's going to be extreme weather, the hurricanes, the tornadoes. We went through a period of time where everyone was warning about terrible hurricanes, and there were very few hurricanes at all. And then we had Katrina and a few others like, see, I told you so. And then we didn't have a lot of hurricanes again. Back in the 1970s, it was global cooling, and they're like, we were wrong then. Don't hold it against us. What I find interesting is that the solutions for global cooling are the same damn solutions they're offering for global warming. The West must give up Western comfort. I'm not going to give up Western comfort. I like my SUV. I want to play this exchange. This is Joe Kernan on CNBC. And he's talking to Pete Buttigieg. What Buttigieg says doesn't really matter. It's the question. And I'm glad that someone at CNBC asked the question. Listen to this.
So, Secretary, I have kind of a philosophical question about how we approach things in terms of dealing with emissions and dealing with trying to cut down on the use of fossil fuels, and how we deal with what Europe might be facing. And what I mean by that is there are real possibilities that people might not have air conditioning during a heat wave, or in the winter that they may not have enough energy to heat their homes at this point. Now, the mitigation factors that we're employing to try to cut down on emissions, those really aren't going to cut CO2 emissions till probably 2030. And while we're dealing with these, we've got India building coal plants, we've got China building coal plants, just hand over fist and emitting and not really helping our efforts whatsoever. When wind and solar won't power the homes in Europe, how do we not use hydrocarbons to make sure that near term these people aren't either freezing or dying from the heat? It seems like a real quandary at this point to try to do these, to near term try to do these things when near term we need power, we need energy. So how do you declare, how do you declare a climate crisis in the middle of an actual weather crisis?
Well, look, obviously those two things are closely related. I mean, it's more than 100 degrees in London today, or at least it was yesterday. We've seen things happen in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. that are supposed to be basically all but statistically impossible, and they're happening more and more often. But this is what a transition looks like, right? This is exactly the challenge that we're living through. You can't flip a switch. You can't do it overnight.
I think Kernan gets the better exchange here. Buttigieg wants to, we've got to transition, we've got to get away. But the point is, in Texas right now, if you have a smart thermostat, and by the way, I should say this is why I like Apple and Apple devices. The way Apple HomeKit works, your power company can't control your thermostat. But if you have a Google device, a Nest or something like that, or the Amazon system, your power company is turning up the air conditioner so it turns off in the middle of the summer to save on the power grid. They're controlling your power. Don't get a smart thermostat because they can take it over unless you're on Apple and have HomeKit to avoid them from doing this. They're taking over your power in Texas. In Texas, for God's sakes, Texas, the middle of the summer heat, the power company's like, oh, too much stress on the grid. We gotta turn people's air conditioners off at night. Why is it that the land of the free and the home of the brave should be reduced to third-class, third-world power structures because the left demands we give up everything? They want us on wind and solar. There are times the sun doesn't shine. There are times the wind doesn't blow. The last time we were dependent on wind, water, and solar for everything, we called it the Dark Ages. And that's where they want to send us. I don't care about climate change, except I care very passionately that these clowns in the media and in the Democratic Party want to degrade our way of life because it has become their religion. It is a by faith proposition to them that we are all to blame. And what happens? What happens if they all get us to put a windmill behind our house and sweat to death and die of heat stroke and freeze during the wintertime, and we all die? The climate will still change. China and Russia and India and Brazil will still pump out emissions. The solution to every great American problem has always been to adapt. These people don't want us to adapt. They want us to go back. They want to set us back. They want us to adapt in a way that is not adaptation, it's regression. We should adapt. All these people, they keep building houses on the beach. They sure don't seem like they're really cared about climate change while they're lecturing us on it. They all have their private jets. John Kerry traveling the world on a private jet lecturing people about climate change. Get rid of your private jets. I will take you seriously when you start acting like you take it seriously. They don't act like they take it seriously. What they act like is that they are the ruling elite and they should not have to suffer for our sins. We should have to suffer, even for theirs. They act like substitutionary atonement. Instead of Christ dying on the cross to forgive us of our sins, we must all sweat to death to atone for their sins of their private jets and their big houses and their giant carbon footprints. You and I have to give up our small carbon footprints because they've got to preserve theirs. We are the substitutionary atonement for their sins. And our suffering will make them whole. They don't want China to suffer. They don't want India to suffer. They want us to suffer. They want us to sweat. They want us to freeze. And then what they do is they try to scare us all. Oh my gosh, all these people in Europe are dying. It's hot in Europe. You know what they don't have in Europe? Air conditioner. How do I know? I've been there lots and lots of times. Many of those places do not have air conditioning because they're not used to heat. It's like when you go to San Francisco, everybody leaves their window open and nobody has air conditioning because the temperature is usually mild. A heat wave comes in for a week or two. They're like, oh my gosh, it's climate change. We're all going to die. Get a freaking air conditioner for your window. Except in California, they make it too expensive with the power grid. Adapt, people. We are the most adaptable species, according to the left. We are a species. We are evolved from the apes, according to them. And yet somehow we can't adapt and figure out how to work around climate change. Instead, we're all going to die. We're all going to sweat. No, we're going to die because we're going to overheat because they told us to use windmills and solar panels, which don't work when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. They won't even invest in nuclear power. The left in this country does not want us to have nuclear power, which should be the big tip-off. This has nothing to do with climate and everything to do with them hating Western-style capitalism. If they wanted to invest in green energy, invest in nuclear power. Germany has now declared nuclear power to be green energy. The left has gone apoplectic. It's the greenest energy we have, and it's power that keeps on giving. We should be building nuclear power plants in every single state in this country to offload capacity to that instead of wind and solar. But no, they are emotionally invested in something. And when you become emotionally invested in something, it takes on the air of religion, it takes on the air of dogma, and it takes on the air of a by faith proposition. And you can't dissuade these people from their faith that we're all going to die. So their solution is to make sure we do all die. You can't win this argument. The only way is to not play. So I refuse to care.